of different techniques that you should be using when you're writing your notes and how you think about the information when you're learning it. And this is a little bit weird if you think about it, but a lot of people don't actually think about what they're doing with information that they hear or see. They'll often read, and that's where the buck stops. You read, and that's it. You listen, and that's it. There isn't really a conscious process of doing something with that information. And the thing with the brain is that it works a lot better when you give it more of a focus and more of a direction. Yes, you can sit there and just read and listen, and your brain will figure some things out and learn and piece it together and end up organizing it in different places in your mental room just because your brain is a really powerful learning machine. But it's a lot less effective than actually if you give it clear direction and clear focus and give it a certain intention so that you can actually take that information and enhance the learning process that's going on inside our head. Because remember, the studying that we're doing out here, the notes that we're writing, the books that we're reading, and the lectures or classes that we're listening to, that's all of the stuff that we're trying to do in order to actually get the knowledge up in here. It doesn't matter how many notes you're writing. It doesn't matter how many books you've read. If you don't have the knowledge in your brain, you didn't do any real learning. And so because of the fact that we want to learn, not just do mindless study, we need to be in control of what goes on in our brain, and the way that we write our notes can actually facilitate that. So one of the first things that I would recommend for a very beginner who's just starting to deviate away from normal conventional note writing is to actually just simply split your page in half and have a collecting step and a processing step. So what we're doing here is we're saying, I understand there's a difference between taking down information and then organizing that information and making it my own. If you imagine something that you have learned a long time ago that you know really well, it's kind of like your basic knowledge now, but maybe a 10-year-old wouldn't know this, then when you teach it to someone else, you're probably going to teach it in a slightly different way to how your friend might teach it. And that's not because you're right and they're wrong. It's just that the way you see it might be slightly different because you've made the knowledge your own. And you want to do that for everything that you learn. You want to make the knowledge your own. So when we divide the page in two, we can say when we're in class, we're simply writing down the notes as we normally would. We're writing it down, we're taking the information in, and all of that sort of thing. And so this is pretty messy, it's chaotic, it's not organized. You don't want to be writing too much because it's just very time consuming to physically write so much. So you want to minimize that, use a bit more keywords. There are a lot of words like the, and, leads to, in addition, things like that we end up writing that we don't need. We can use symbols like arrows or plus signs or, some kind of arrow that indicates that one thing leads to another. So we can use a lot of these symbols to cut down on a lot of the words that we're writing. We want to collect that information first. What we want to do while we're collecting is every time the concept is changing, this might be at the end of every paragraph, after your teacher's finished speaking to you, when you feel like, oh, we've kind of covered that subtopic and we're ready to move on, you want to have a look at everything that you've written down on the collecting stage, and then you want to try to process it into something that makes a little bit more sense for you. So this is kind of like paraphrasing, but the difference between paraphrasing and this processing step is that paraphrasing simply means rewriting it in your own words. So you'd potentially, if we were paraphrasing, we would take this paragraph and we'd rewrite it in a simpler sentence that's kind of saying the same thing, but just redone in our own words. Now, that's good, but we actually want to take it a little bit further because we can. So instead of doing it this way, we want to actually think about the simplest way that we can represent as much information as possible. And this is the key difference between paraphrasing and the processing step. We want to represent as much as possible in the simplest way. So when we look at this, we might think that, hey, actually, this whole set of ideas is kind of talking about the same thing. And I feel like I could represent that by having a drawing here leading to another drawing here, and then 2 or 3 sentences underneath that to really highlight the important parts. So by doing this, you can actually focus purely on representing the ideas super cleanly and simply on this side without having to worry about missing any detail, because you've already got all the detail on this side anyway, and it's always there for your reference. But what we want to do is train our brain to be able to simplify as much information as possible and organize it. Because if we simplify it, there's less that our brain needs to hold on to, and therefore it's easier for it to be retained. And a lot of other complex psychology, which later in the course you're going to learn about. But this is also a very fundamental skill, because this ability to process information is critical to using an entire swarm of other note-taking strategies that are vastly more effective even than this. It will save you a ton of time. So you really want to be able to train your brain to think in this way, where there's a difference between just taking information in and then actually processing and doing something with it. So this is a great beginner tool for just training that initial ability and just getting that foundation right. But wait, there's more. We can actually take this technique and make it even better and make it faster for us to be able to do the processing. And the way that we can do this is by activating a specific type of mindset that our brain is hardwired to perform really efficiently under. And that is the problem-solving mindset. So remember how I said that the brain works better when you give it a focus? Well, one of the best focuses for the brain to have is to solve a problem. This is why you end up learning a lot when you're doing past paper questions, because the information that you're trying to consolidate is for the purpose of answering a question. The information has a purpose, and because there's a purpose, your brain knows what to do with the information. And so when we give the brain a problem to solve, any information that we take in is viewed through the lens of, how does this help me solve the problem? It's kind of like if I said that I need you to fix a hole in the wall. And that's your problem. You're thinking, how do I fix the hole in the wall? And I give you a bunch of tools and a bunch of materials. And you'd look at the tool and you'd think, is this going to help me fix the hole in the wall? And by doing that, you would actually examine each tool and each material to see if it helps you fix the hole in the wall. And so you'd actually end up learning a lot about each tool and each material, because you're thinking about all the information in the context of a problem. And your brain works really well that way. So what we can do in our pre-study is spend a little bit of time to create a list of basic questions that we can ask ourselves that might give a bit more purpose to the material. So if you know that the class that's coming up is about electricity or waves in physics, or if we are learning about human evolution, or if we're learning about human physiology or something, then we can ask a series of big questions, and these don't have to even be relevant to your exams or anything. It's just to get your brain thinking about it in terms of solving a problem. We can just ask it a few questions that will make us wonder, why is this important? And we're going to be coming back to this question again, and it's going to mean a whole lot more the next time that we learn about it. But we want to start asking these questions. Why is this important? How can I use this or apply? And if we have just a few questions that we create beforehand, then that means that, number one, we're more likely to be curious about the information as we learn it. We're more likely to ask further questions as we learn more. And as a result, because we're looking at how we can use this information for different purposes, it's easier to actually process it and make it make sense inside our own brains. So a lot of students will spend most of their studying time simply trying to absorb information like some kind of sponge. But our brain does not work that way. Our brain is not a sponge. Our brain is much better at working when it's trying to apply the information for a purpose. So when you're trying to learn anything new, or even if you're revising something that you feel like you're shaky on and you didn't learn it properly the first time, you want to think about how you can apply it as early as possible. You don't want to wait 1 or 2 months until you start doing practice papers. You want to just get that applying the information as soon as is possible. Preferably at the moment you learn it, you want to think, how can I use this information? Or at the very least, at the end of every week when you're going through, you can think, how can I use this information? And when we ask ourselves those questions, even before we've learned it, during our pre-study, it means that the entire week is spent learning stuff where we're curious about it, trying to see how we can apply it, and therefore our retention increases by a lot. And this basic structure is something that we're going to come back to again and again and again, and you're going to realize how powerful it can be when we take this basic skill that you can develop from this very simple technique and then apply it to some more advanced techniques later on. And the most important thing you have to realize here, the most important, is that it doesn't matter if you're doing the questions the right way or the wrong way. It doesn't matter if you processed it the right way or the wrong way. There is no right or wrong way to do these basic skills, because what we're trying to do is get you some more experience at using techniques like this that are deviating away and learn a little bit more about how your brain works. We want to learn what doesn't work as much as we want to learn about what does work. So just go for it. Ask a few questions. If it helped you process the information and understand a little bit better, great. If it didn't, try asking slightly different questions. And we just keep doing that until we find something that works. And that means that later on, when I teach you more techniques that build on these skills, you already have a good foundation to build off of, rather than trying to teach you even more theories that you're going to play around with in your head and ultimately end up with one mediocre looking photo. So remember, the best way to do this is to just start doing it and actually get some real practice under your belt. Don't worry about getting it wrong. The only way you can get this wrong is by not doing it.